An onion that drew no tears and hid far more than flavor. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Tell me where you're listening from. Your comments always brighten these mysteries. I love reading everyone. Now let's begin. If you think a wooden crate has no personality, you haven't watched one sit on Nero Wolfe's red Persian, shedding cedar dust like dandruff and pretending it owns the room. That crate had nerve. It also had a stenciled onion on the lid, and that was what got it past me and into the office. Barely. Fritz had pleaded cuisine, I had invoked carpets, and the crate, being a crate, had sat and said nothing. Typical. Wolfe was at his desk doing what he does when he wants the world to know he's working, reading a book about something no one would call entertainment unless they were paying to impress him. The spine announced aromatics, their volatiles and virtues. He turned a page with his thumb and didn't look at me, which meant he was waiting for me to tell him something that wouldn't annoy him. My options were limited. It arrived 10 minutes ago, I said. Courier. No signature required, which is how you know it's important. Remove it, he said, not glancing up. Fritz is apoplectic. Fritz is beyond that, I said. He's into Latin, abominatio. He believes a crate belongs in a dockyard, not on a Persian. He asked me to quote him. Wolfe's eyes came up then, which you might call progress. If I believed you quoted him, I would fine you $1. What is it? It is, I said, easing the lid loose with my pocket knife. An onion. The top came off with a sigh. Nestled in straw were 6 onions, each wrapped in tissue like a lady's hat. They were handsome as onions go. Rounded shoulders, gleam to the skin, thin papery husks that promised they had nothing to hide. Wolfe set the book down, which meant we had passed from the theoretical to the edible. He rose and came around the desk in his heavy, patient way, the way he reserves for orchids and cold chickens. He leaned without leaning. Wolfe can inspect with dignity, and he inhaled. I won't say I have an educated nose for onions, but I've been in the room when Wolfe has rejected a farmer's market hall like a jury foreman with standards. I inhaled too. There was a faint sweetness, a suggestion of hay after rain. No jab, no promise of tears. If an onion is a handshake, this was damp fingers. Another courier, I said, and a card. The phone will ring in. It rang. You can set your watch by New York traffic, deliberate clients, and Wolfe's orchids at 9, 11, and 4. I got it. Nero Wolfe's office, I said. Archie Goodwin. Yes, the onions are comfortable. Your name? Lady Vaughan, a woman's voice said, cool and efficient, with enough metallic thread to stitch a boardroom together. I'm arriving in 15 minutes. Please do nothing with them. Don't cut them. Don't chill them. Don't, as I've been warned, attempt to saute one to satisfy a private curiosity. We don't saute without counsel, I told her. 15 minutes is acceptable. Do you have counsel? I have something better, she said. A contract and a panic. She hung up, which I approve of in a client. No improvisation, no poetry. I replaced the lid because I'm not a man who tempts fate in Wolfe's office. Wolfe resettled himself. Onions, he said, like a judge reviewing an old statute. If there must be novelties, let them be harmless. The modern appetite insists upon convenience at the cost of honesty. Soon they'll breed a strawberry that tastes of apology. 15 minutes, I said. Should I get a bucket for your tears? Pfui, he said. Nothing in that crate will make me cry. He was right. 15 minutes later, Miss Vaughan arrived, and if she'd been in the crate, we would have charged handling. Early 30s, trim in a way that made the suit look like architecture instead of fabric, hair drawn back not to be pretty, but to be out of the way. She carried a leather folio and the expression of a woman who had told 2 lies already that morning and didn't enjoy the habit. Fritz let her in with a face composed for company. He had forgiven the crate only enough to open the door. Wolfe didn't rise. Wolfe rises for women the way a mountain moves for weather. It happens, but it's the mountain's decision. He wobbled the appropriate fingers and said, "Miss Vaughan?" "Ms.," she said, not sharply. She crossed to the crate, lifted the lid, and looked at her onions as if counting children at a school trip. "Thank you for seeing me on short notice." "I have not," Wolfe said, which is how he begins when he wants to reshape a conversation. "Miss Vaughan, you have sent me alliums. You propose an explanation." She met his gaze. Some people glance at Wolfe and then look at me for translation. She didn't. "Those are Lacrima 9, a proprietary hybrid. Their selling point is in the name. They don't make you cry." Wolfe's lip performed an eloquent curl. "What a mercy." "And," she added, "they don't make you feel nothing. They retain flavor, aroma. They cook like onions that respect themselves. That is the promise. We've spent 3 years and more money than my board wants to admit making that promise. Yesterday, at a tasting for investors, they failed. No tears, but no flavor. Wet paper. She stopped, as if her mouth had walked into a glass door called admission. "You gave them to someone," Wolfe said. "To a cook, a chef. To a chef influencer," she conceded. "And if you're thinking she had to swallow the last 2 syllables, you have my sympathy. He has 20 million subscribers who think he invented browning. He sliced, sautéed, and, publicly, declared our onions an insult to the skillet. He said we had solved tears by killing taste. We lost 2 investors by the end of the demonstration and 3 more by dinner. Overnight, our competitors have been—" She waved it away. "You read the news, Mr. Wolfe?" "I avoid it," he said. "It interferes with digestion. What makes you imagine your onions failed due to malfeasance rather than mere incompetence?" She set the folio on the desk, opened it, and produced a thin packet with the relieved air of a litigant showing exhibits. "Because I cut one here in my hotel this morning." She nodded toward the crate. "I wept. They were perfect, not painful, not violent, just honest. And the flavor was there. Raw, it had the proper bite. We test every shipment. The batch from which these came was certified last week. Yesterday's were wrong. Today's are right. Something was switched." Wolfe said. He shifted his eyes to me. "Beer." "You don't drink before dinner," I said. "For her," he said. Ms. Vaughan declined the beer. "I don't drink when I'm losing millions," she said. "Mr. Wolfe, someone tampered with our tasting, swapped onions, mishandled them. I don't know. I have reasons to suspect 3 parties. 4, if you count our own PR firm, which I do because I've learned not to underestimate treachery that smiles. I can pay your fee. I can sign your paper. I need it explained, and I need it soon enough that I can salvage a launch date." You could see Wolfe's shoulders tilt a degree toward interest. Culinary affronts have lanes in his brain that ordinary crime cannot enter. Still, he played the miser with his attention. "Explain." He gestured, a small invitation. "The 3 parties. First, Dr. Ezra Kimmel, our lead agronomist and my former partner. He opposes commercialization at this stage. He thinks we're 6 months early and resents the board overriding him. Second, Bruno Saad, chef influencer, the one who torpedoed us on camera. He baked in a clause that pays him more for controversy than for praise. Third, Alba Ruiseau. She runs a boutique produce chain that will carry Lacrima 9 if we deliver. She's invested heavily and stands to lose reputation if these are a joke. That gives her motive either to destroy us and buy the carcass cheap or to control the story. And the PR firm, you can imagine." "I can," Wolfe said dryly. "They leak as a matter of process." He turned his head a fraction. "Why me?" "Because you won't move," she said. "And because you won't be moved. Everyone else I can buy or bait. You will either tell me the truth or throw me out. I don't have time for kindness." That was the moment. If you've sat through 100 of them, you learn the shape. Wolfe's eyelids lower a shade. He lets the air congeal. He arranges the next hour of other people's lives without getting up. Then he either refuses with an oration about peace and orchids, or he accepts without saying why. This time he glanced at the crate again, and something like distaste crossed his face. Not for the client, for the idea. "Pfui," he said softly. "A tearless onion. Civilization peels itself." He looked at me. "Archie, the usual terms. Miss Vaughan will deposit $25,000 against expenses and my fee. She will provide the contracts with the chef, the agronomist, and the retailer, and a list of all who had access to the tasting. You will take custody of that crate." I looked at the crate. It looked back, smug. "You're taking it," I said. "I am," he said. "For reasons I will not explain. Miss Vaughan, you will permit me to direct your movements. You will not contact any of the parties without consulting Mr. Goodwin." She nodded, fast. "Done." "Good," Wolfe said. "You may dine with us tonight. Your presence will be of use." "To the onions?" I asked. "To my cook," he said. "Fritz will want to test them. We shall weep or we shall not. Either way, we will know something." Miss Vaughan closed the folio, and for the first time her voice softened. "Mr. Wolfe, I don't need the world to cry," she said. "I just need them to taste." Wolfe's mouth twitched. "Miss Vaughan," he said, "the world rarely does what we need. Archie, call Saul Panza." He lifted aromatics again as if he had never put it down. "If there is trickery here, it will not long be anonymous." Dinner at Wolfe's table is not something you rush through unless you've developed a taste for humiliation. He runs it like a symphony, and tonight's overture featured Miss Vaughan sitting across from me with posture that could hold its own at a coronation. Fritz had produced a meal that smelled so divine I could have confessed to a felony just for another helping. But the onions, our guests of honor, sat in a silver bowl at the center of the table, glistening under the chandelier like gemstones that didn't know their worth. Fritz had sliced and sautéed them himself. He'd given them every courtesy short of a parade. They looked right, smelled right, and when I took a forkful, I'll admit, it wasn't half bad. Sweet, subtle, but it didn't bring tears or poetry. Just food. Wolfe chewed slowly, his eyes half-lidded, the way a monk might contemplate the afterlife. "Well?" I asked after the third silent minute. "They are legitimate," he said finally. "The flavor is intact, a pleasant synthesis of sharpness and sugar, yet—" His eyes shifted to Miss Vaughan. "You said yesterday's batch were insipid." She nodded. "They were. Then either your chef sabotaged your tasting or someone substituted another cultivar. I shall know which. Mr. Goodwin, tomorrow you will interview the chef and the agronomist. Begin with the chef. A man who earns money by tasting what others have cooked cannot resist talking about himself." "That's a scientific principle?" I asked. "A universal one," Wolfe said. "Fritz, coffee." Ms. Vaughan was watching him with a mixture of admiration and apprehension. "You think the chef deliberately humiliated us?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that your industry rewards humiliation. If an influencer can ruin you in a single sentence, he has a stake in his own cruelty. Whether he was paid to be cruel or simply enjoyed the opportunity remains to be seen." After she left, having deposited a retainer that would fund an orchid expedition, Wolfe retreated to his chair and I to the kitchen where Fritz was polishing his pride. "They are good onions," he declared, "but not onions for hearts. They do not fight back." "Join the club," I said. "The world's full of things that don't fight back anymore." The next morning, I was at Bruno Saad's studio in Midtown, a gleaming glass and steel monument to self-promotion. Saad himself greeted me in a silk apron with his initials embroidered large enough for a passing helicopter to read. "Ah, Mr. Goodwin, Nero Wolfe's right arm." He offered his hand, then withdrew it before I could shake, probably afraid I'd smudge his manicure. To what do I owe this pleasure, or should I say publicity? Neither, I said. We're investigating a little culinary tragedy, Miss Vaughan's onions. You declared them the flavorless offspring of greed. Ring any bells? His smile thinned. Ah, that video has reached a few million eyes. But I spoke honestly. They were flavorless. I do not lie to my audience. You don't have to, I said. You just have to entertain them. Tell me, did you handle the onions yourself? Of course, he said. They were delivered to my prep kitchen the day before the tasting. My sous chef sliced them, I cooked them, and the cameras rolled. Anyone else touch them before that? He shrugged, too casually. The supplier's assistant. I don't recall his name. A young man with a French accent and a tragic haircut. He unpacked the crate. I wrote it down. And you didn't notice anything off before the camera started rolling. Sade leaned forward. Mr. Goodwin, onions are simple. You cut, you smell, you cry, or not. These did nothing. No aroma, no soul, dead food. I was embarrassed for the brand. I did Miss Vaughan a favor by being honest. You do all your favors in front of 20 million viewers? He smirked. It's the only honesty people believe now. He offered me coffee from a gleaming chrome machine that hissed like a cat with asthma. I declined. As I left, he called after me. Tell Mr. Wolfe I adore his taste, but not his waistline. Back in the street, I phoned Wolfe. The chef says the onions came through some French kid, probably the assistant of someone higher up. I'll check with Kimmel next. Do so, Wolfe said. Observe whether he mourns the failure of his creation or revels in its disgrace. A scientist who feels neither is a fraud. Dr. Ezra Kimmel lived and worked in a greenhouse complex upstate that looked like it had been designed by someone with a grudge against straight lines. I met him among rows of test plants, leeks, shallots, and onions wearing identification tags like prison numbers. He was thin, pale, and twitchy, with the kind of eyes that saw more chlorophyll than daylight. Lacrima 9 was my child, he said, before I'd asked anything. And they commercialized it too soon. You cannot bottle perfection. You can only ruin it. You're saying you wanted it to fail. I wanted it to mature, he said, but Miss Vaughan's board was impatient. Investors are like fungus, rapid, invasive, and impossible to remove. So yes, I was not heartbroken when it faltered. I eyed him. You were at the tasting? No. I was excluded. She said I was a distraction. My presence would have suggested instability. Can you imagine? I created them and she left me watching from a live stream. Then you don't know who handled the onions at the event? He hesitated. I know who was supposed to handle them. Her PR liaison, a woman named Ruisseau. She's ambitious, calculating. If there was sabotage, she'd do it with a manicure, not a knife. By the time I got back to the brownstone, the sun was considering retirement. Wolfe was in the office, eyes closed, hands on his middle, looking like a Roman emperor in the final act. Report, he said. I did, from Said's silk apron to Kimmel's chlorophyll sermon. He listened without blinking. When I finished, he said, Phooey, each of them lies by instinct, the chef by vanity, the scientist by injury, and the businesswoman by nature. Tomorrow we shall see which lie serves flavor. He picked up an onion from the crate, turned it in his palm, and smiled faintly. An organism that compels tears without cruelty, he murmured. If only humans could do the same. The next morning started with Wolfe's usual ritual of ignoring the outside world and me trying to keep it from banging on the door. At 9 sharp, he was in the plant rooms with Theodore, murmuring over orchids like a priest before Mass. I was at my desk reviewing the notes from the day before, the chef with his vanity, the scientist with his vendetta, and the businesswoman who might weaponize both. The only person who seemed straightforward was Miss Vaughan, which meant she was probably hiding the best lie of all. By 10 o'clock, Fritz brought in coffee and a plate of something that had once been an egg and was now an artistic statement. Wolfe arrived soon after, lowering himself into the chair as if gravity worked harder for him than for the rest of us. He glanced at me over the rim of his cup. "You have spoken with Kimmel and Saad. Neither satisfied you." "I've met alley cats more sincere," I said. "Kimmel's still bitter about losing control of his creation, and Saad's in love with his reflection. Both could have sabotaged the tasting and slept fine after." "Yet neither had access to the event," Wolfe said. "That leaves Rousseau. What of her?" "I've got an appointment in an hour," I said. "She runs her office out of a corner suite on Lexington, PR Central. I expect perfume, confidence, and very little truth." Wolfe's lips twitched. "As you say, observe her office. Such people decorate to broadcast allegiance, to money, power, or themselves. It will tell you which she values most." I went uptown. The Rousseau agency was everything Wolfe predicted. Polished surfaces, discreet lighting, and a receptionist who looked like she billed by the compliment. Alba Rousseau herself appeared 5 minutes later, wearing grey silk and an expression that said she'd rather be photographed than interviewed. "Mr. Goodwin," she greeted, offering a hand that felt as fragile as a contract clause. "Nero Wolfe's assistant. How novel." "I've been called worse," I said. "I'm looking into the onion affair. Ms. Vaughn tells us you coordinated the tasting." Her smile didn't move her eyes. "That debacle? Yes, unfortunately." "Unfortunately because it failed," I said, "or because someone made sure it did." She gestured toward a low chair. "Please, you don't really think there was sabotage, do you? Bruno Sadi thrives on controversy. If he had adored those onions, his audience would have fallen asleep. Outrage sells. That's all there is to it." "Then why did Miss Vaughn hire us?" "Because she can't afford to believe it's that simple. She needs a villain. Every scandal needs one, and she'd prefer it not be herself." That sounded rehearsed, which meant she'd said it before, possibly to an investor, possibly to her mirror. I tried another angle. "You handled the onions before the tasting?" "Yes, of course," she said. "I inspected them when they arrived. They looked fine. I had my assistant Henri arrange them for Saad's team." "Henri," I said. "French accent? Bad haircut?" Her brow lifted. "You've met him?" "Not exactly. He came up in conversation." "Where is he now?" Her hesitation was microscopic, but Wolfe would have spotted it with his eyes closed. "He's no longer with us. He resigned this morning. Personal reasons." "Convenient timing," I said. "Mind sharing his address?" "I'm afraid I can't. Confidentiality agreements, you understand." "I understand you'd rather not have Wolfe subpoena your coffee schedule," I said pleasantly. That earned me a chill smile, but she scribbled an address on a card and slid it across the desk. "He lives in Queens, though I doubt you'll find him home." I thanked her and left before she could rewrite the conversation. The address turned out to be a basement apartment behind a shuttered bakery. The mailbox still had H. Moreau written in fading pen. No answer at the door. I used the old detective technique of knocking again, harder. After the third try, a neighbor across the hall poked her head out, a woman in slippers and suspicion. "You looking for Henri?" she asked. "He left last night. 2 men came by with a van, packed up his things. Didn't even say goodbye. Nice kid, kept to himself, smelled like onions." "Did he say where he was going?" She shrugged. "Said something about a job upstate, farming or something." I thanked her, went back to my car, and phoned Wolfe. "He's gone," I said. "Van, 2 guys, midnight exit. Might be coincidence, but I doubt it." "Pfui," Wolfe said. "Coincidence is the refuge of fools. Upstate, you say, where Kimmel's greenhouses are located." "That's the direction," I agreed. "You thinking Kimmel lured him back?" "I'm thinking," Wolfe said, "that someone who handles onions and vanishes with haste is either guilty or dead. We must learn which. You will return here. Bring whatever you took from his apartment." "I didn't take anything," I said. "You should have," he replied. "Rectify it." I went back. Henri's door was still locked, but the neighbor, bless her nosy heart, had a spare key for emergencies. Inside, the place smelled faintly of chemicals and dried earth. There was a single crate in the corner, smaller than the one Miss Vaughan sent us, but marked with the same logo, Lacrima 9. Inside were 3 onions, one half cut and starting to brown. I wrapped them in paper, left a note for the landlord, and drove back to the brownstone. Wolfe met me in the office, eyes narrowing as I set the crate before him. He took one look, inhaled, and said quietly, "This batch has been treated. Do you smell it, Archie? A faint trace of acetone, some solvent used in laboratory preservation." I sniffed. "Smells more like guilt to me." He ignored that. "Call Saul Panzer. Have him locate Henri Moreau within 24 hours, alive or not. Miss Vaughan will join us this evening. By then I shall know which onion made us weep." He leaned back, fingers steepled, eyes half shut. "Archie, the world is full of tears that serve no purpose. Let us see whether these belong to science or deceit." Saul Panzer doesn't waste words or time. When you hire Saul, you get results faster than the truth can dress itself. By the next morning, he was sitting in Wolfe's office, wearing that expressionless competence that made other detectives look like amateurs playing tag with clues. Wolfe had finished breakfast and was pretending to read Les Amis des Plantes, but I could tell he was listening. Saul set a folded paper on the desk. Henri Moreau boarded a bus to Albany last night, got off 2 hours later in Poughkeepsie, rented a car under a different name. Henry Moore. The car was found this morning outside Dr. Ezra Kimmel's greenhouse complex. Empty. No sign of him since. I whistled. That's either devotion to the scientific arts or a one-way trip to compost. Wolfe's brows lowered like storm clouds. Dead, perhaps, or hidden. Either way, deliberate. Miss Vaughan will arrive shortly. We will discuss it then. He didn't have long to wait. Leda Vaughan swept in 20 minutes later, looking like someone who'd slept 3 hours and used caffeine as perfume. Fritz offered coffee, which she accepted as if it were life support. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "I had a call this morning from our PR director, Ms. Ruisseau. She insists this whole investigation is damaging our brand. Feeding the narrative of crisis, she called it. She's asked the board to terminate your contract." "She will not succeed," Wolfe said without looking up. "Your board is ruled by fear, not initiative. Fear cannot act without certainty, and she has none." Vaughan's lips curved faintly. "You're confident." "Not confident, accurate," he said. "Now tell me, did you inform anyone of Henri's disappearance?" "No, I only learned of it when you called." "Good. Keep it that way. Panic is an untidy instrument." I handed Saul's report across the desk. Vaughan scanned it, eyes tightening. He went back to Kimmel. That can't be coincidence. Ezra resented losing him. Henri admired him. Wolfe grunted. "Admiration breeds folly. What you describe suggests complicity. Kimmel's resentment and Henri's loyalty are a blend ripe for manipulation." She looked at me. "Did you find anything in Henri's apartment?" 3 onions, I said. "Same logo, but Wolfe says they were doctored with solvent. That ring any bells?" Her brow furrowed. "We use ethanol for lab sterilization, but acetone, no. That would destroy the cell structure. You'd lose aroma, texture, everything that makes Lacrima 9 unique." "That matches the tasting failure," I said. "Sade said the onions had no soul. Maybe someone treated them, killed the chemistry on purpose." Wolfe nodded once. "Exactly. Sabotage by contamination. It need not have been elaborate. A misting of the wrong compound, and your miracle becomes mulch." Saul cleared his throat. "You want me to poke around the greenhouse?" "No. Wolfe said. Archie will go. You will remain on Henry's trail discreetly. If he surfaces, follow. Do not interfere. That was that. An hour later, I was heading north in Wolfe's sedan, trying not to think about the irony of chasing onions into the wilderness. The Kimmel Greenworks complex sat on the edge of the Hudson, glass domes gleaming in the morning sun. A young woman at the gatehouse checked my credentials and radioed someone. A few minutes later, Dr. Kimmel appeared, wearing rubber boots and suspicion. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, not exactly welcoming. "You again? I suppose Wolfe sent you to measure my conscience." "Just to sniff around," I said. "I hear your former assistant dropped by." His eyes flickered. "Henry? I haven't seen him. Is he missing?" "You tell me. His car's outside." He frowned, genuine or well-practiced. "That's impossible." "Yet it's there, parked neatly beside your loading bay. I checked the plate myself." He rubbed his temple. "He must have come during the night. Perhaps he wanted to collect samples. He was obsessed with a particular crossbreed, an earlier generation of La Crema. He said the older variant produced better flavor." "Older variant, huh?" I said. "Would that version cry?" Kimmel gave me a tired smile. More than the investors would tolerate. We walked through the greenhouse aisles. The air was thick with humidity and the faint sweetness of earth. I spotted a workstation at the back. Beakers, trays, a small chemical cabinet. On one of the counters lay a pair of gloves stained faintly yellow. "Those yours?" I asked. He hesitated. "No, Henry's, perhaps." "Mind if I take them?" He did mind, but I took them anyway. Then I noticed something under the table. A broken onion, shriveled and translucent, leaking a pale film that had soaked into the mat. "Acetone," I muttered. Kimmel paled. That's impossible. I forbid those solvents in this facility." "Then someone didn't ask your permission." He backed away a step. "You think I had anything to do with this?" "I think you knew it was coming," I said. "You're too smart not to." Before he could answer, a voice called from the far door. Alba Ruizo, in heels and a trench coat that didn't belong in a greenhouse, walked toward us. Her eyes glittered like she'd already composed the headline. "Mr. Goodwin," she said sweetly. "I didn't expect to find you rooting around in the shrubbery. Miss Vaughn didn't mention she'd dispatched her hound." "Wolfe's hound," I corrected. "We're particular about brands." She ignored that and turned to Kimmel. "I came to inspect the site for investors. Imagine my surprise when I find Nero Wolfe's man interrogating you. How very theatrical." Kimmel muttered something about coincidence. I didn't buy it. She and Kimmel exchanged a glance. Brief, nervous, the kind that hides a shared sin. "Miss Rousseau," I said. "I didn't know PR extended to agriculture." She smiled. "It extends wherever reputation lives. Right now, ours is fragile. I'd prefer if you left before you bruise it further." I tipped my hat. If reputation's that fragile, it's already rotten. Back in the car, I called Wolfe. "Guess who just turned up at Kimmel's greenhouse?" "Rousseau. Full costume, wrong setting. Henry's gloves are here, acetone too. My gut says this isn't science, it's theater." Wolfe's voice rumbled through the receiver. "Then let us ensure the curtain falls properly. Return at once. Tonight we dine with deceit." By the time I got back to the brownstone, the evening rush was clogging the avenues and my temper. Wolfe was in the office. Where else? Behind his desk like a mountain that had been growing since breakfast. He didn't bother greeting me. He just lifted one finger, the universal sign for "Don't ruin my digestion until I finish this paragraph." I waited, dumped the evidence bag with Henri's gloves on the side table, and gave Fritz a nod through the door. I needed coffee, not patience. When Wolfe finally looked up, I gave him the condensed version. Rousseau showing up where she shouldn't, Henri's car abandoned outside Kimmel's greenhouse, and the acetone-stained gloves. He listened without a flicker. Pfui, he said. They are amateurs. Chemical sabotage. Badly disguised, and the woman's arrival confirms it. She cannot resist the scent of her own drama. She was acting, I said, but I'm not sure if she's the director or the audience. Both, perhaps, he murmured. Miss Vaughan will arrive shortly, yes? She's due in 15, I said. You want me to prep the office? He grunted approval, which meant yes. When Fritz ushered Lady Vaughan in, she looked even more brittle than before, a woman built from sleeplessness and determination. She went straight to the desk. You found him? Not yet, Wolfe said. But we have found what he left behind, and what your enemies hoped would stay buried. He nodded to me. I placed the gloves and a sealed sample of the ruined onion on the blotter. Wolfe leaned forward, inspecting them as though they were relics of some extinct species. Miss Vaughan, he said, these gloves bear residue consistent with acetone or a similar solvent. It is used to strip essential oils. When applied to an onion, it leaves no odor, but destroys the volatile compounds that produce flavor. The sabotage was deliberate, calculated, and executed by someone who understood your process well enough to harm it without detection. She paled slightly. Kimmel? Possibly, Wolfe said. But consider motive. He opposed commercialization, yet if he wished to vindicate his position, a public humiliation would damage him as well. The taint of failure attaches to every scientist who claims success too early. He would know that. She nodded slowly. Then Henri. Loyal, naive, easy to influence. Not without help, Wolfe said. Someone had to supply the means and the confidence to use it. Someone who benefits not from your ruin, but from owning it afterward. Ruisseau's name hovered in the silence like the aftertaste of bad wine. She was there, I said. Kimmel's greenhouse. Walked in like she belonged. They looked like conspirators who'd forgotten their lines. Wolfe's eyes opened a fraction wider. Then we have the pattern. Miss Rousseau arranged the tasting, substituted the treated onions, and used the resulting scandal to position herself, and perhaps her firm, for control of your company's narrative. The eyes, agronomist's resentment, and the assistant's loyalty were tools. Leda sat back, stunned but not disbelieving. She would destroy 3 years of work for publicity? She would, Wolfe said, if the ashes were valuable enough. Your investors will panic. They will seek leadership. She will offer it, with a new rebranding, a new partnership. Your ruin is her leverage. Then we stop her, she said. Wolfe nodded. Yes, but first we expose her, and in a manner that satisfies both intellect and justice. Archie, assemble the suspects. Tomorrow evening here, Kimmel, Ruisseau, and the chef. Miss Vaughan will attend as witness. I blinked. All three in the same room. That'll be lively. That, he said, is the point. The next day was a parade of phone calls, persuasion, and thinly veiled threats. Kimmel came reluctantly, muttering about legal counsel. Saad, the celebrity cook, arrived in a suit 2 sizes too loud and a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Ruisseau accepted last, her voice through the phone bright and careless, the kind that hides calculation. Of course, Mr. Goodwin. Anything to help Mr. Wolfe clarify the truth. That evening, at precisely 8, the office was ready. Chairs arranged in a semicircle facing Wolfe's desk. The crate of untouched onions sat in the corner like an exhibit waiting for a trial. Wolfe, dressed in his dark suit, looked like the presiding judge of some forgotten court. I handled the door, the drinks, and the tension. Kimmel came first, stiff and sullen. Saad breezed in next, filling the air with cologne and self-satisfaction. Then came Rousseau, unhurried, immaculate, eyes bright with mockery. I must say, Mr. Wolfe, she said, settling gracefully into a chair, you do make melodrama look respectable. Wolfe inclined his head. If truth were easy, Miss Rousseau, it would be cheap. You are here to ensure neither condition applies." When everyone was seated, he began, not with accusations, but with civility. He questioned each about the tasting, their roles, their recollections. Sud boasted, Kimmel bristled, Rousseau deflected. Vaughan watched in silence, her knuckles white on her chair arm. Then Wolfe gestured to the crate. "Miss Vaughan's onions," he said. "Untouched, unspoiled. Mr. Goodwin, please fetch one of the samples from the contaminated batch." I placed a small covered dish on the desk. Wolfe lifted the lid. Even from where I stood, the faint chemical tang hit like a lie exposed. "Mr. Sade," Wolfe said, "you cooked these? Did you detect this aroma?" Sade hesitated. "No, but I remember something off, a hollowness. I assumed it was a bad batch." "Bad batch," Wolfe said. "Or altered batch." His gaze shifted to Rousseau, calm but merciless. "The shipment for the tasting passed through your hands last. You arranged the display, the lighting, the narrative. Tell me, how much acetone does it take to ruin a reputation?" Her eyes narrowed. "That's an ugly question, Mr. Wolfe." "It's an ugly act," he said, "but one beautifully staged. You needed a fall, an outrage, to reclaim control. You hired the chef who thrives on scandal, silenced the agronomist who might suspect, and planted the solvent through a gullible intermediary. Henri Moreau delivered the onions and vanished. I presume you paid him to disappear, or buried him under another contract." Her lips parted, ready to protest, but Wolfe raised a hand. "Do not lie, Miss Rousseau. The police will find the payment. Panzer has traced the transfer. What interests me more is your motive. You sabotaged not to destroy, but to own. You intended to buy Miss Vaughan's failure at a discount." Silence filled the room like smoke. Kimmel looked sick. Sade stared at his shoes. Rousseau sat perfectly still, the frost melting from her expression into something coldly human. Then she smiled faintly. "You're wasted on mysteries, Mr. Wolfe. You'd make an excellent prosecutor." "I'm a private man," he said, "but justice, like appetite, requires satisfaction." She rose, adjusting her sleeve with studied calm. "If you're quite finished, I'll see myself out." "No," Wolfe said. "You will remain until Inspector Kramer arrives. Mr. Goodwin." I nodded, already dialing. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed, as if the matter were concluded. "The world," he murmured, "may forgive deception in business, but not in flavor. A ruined onion is still an insult to truth." Kramer arrived with his usual combination of irritation and curiosity, like a man showing up at a dinner he didn't want to attend but suspected might serve decent whiskey. He took one look at the assembled cast, Vaughan pale but composed, Kimmel wilted, Sud pretending not to be terrified, and Rousseau cool as marble, and let out a grunt that could have meant anything. "All right, Wolfe," he said, dropping his hat on the edge of the desk. "You said it's urgent, and I left a perfectly good steak to get here. Let's hear the song." Wolfe, still seated, didn't bother rising. He rarely does. He gestured toward me. "Archie will provide the prelude. Then you may question Miss Rousseau, assuming she still finds words agreeable." I gave Kramer the rundown. The tasting, the sabotage, Henri's disappearance, and the acetone. He listened with the kind of patience cops reserve for lunatics and lawyers. When I finished, he turned to Rousseau. "You want to tell me why your fingerprints are all over a sabotage that cost investors a few $1,000,000? She crossed her legs and smiled faintly. "Because Mr. Wolfe enjoys melodrama. I run a public relations firm, Inspector. If a client fails, my job is to mitigate it, not manufacture it. You'll find nothing tying me to any chemical tampering." "That," Wolfe said, "is precisely what makes your craft dangerous. You corrupt by influence, not action. Yet your influence has a trail. Mr. Panzer located a transfer of funds from one of your shell accounts to Henri Moreau. a payment disguised as consulting fees. The transaction was routed through Luxembourg. The date coincides with the night before the tasting. Kramer's head swung toward her. You want to confirm that, lady, or should I get the paper trail from headquarters? Her smile faltered, the first sign of a crack. I don't handle the financial side personally. That's enough, Kramer said. You're coming downtown. Inspector, Wolfe interrupted smoothly. Do allow me 10 minutes more. You may have her body. I require the soul of the matter. Kramer groaned, but waved for him to continue. Wolfe steepled his fingers. Miss Rousseau, I am curious. Why select acetone? It is crude, imprecise, and guaranteed to degrade the product beyond salvation. You could have used ethanol, glycerin, even refrigeration mishandling. But acetone leaves a trace, a whisper of artifice. You wanted to be discovered, just not by the dullards you deceived. You wanted an audience equal to your vanity. She stiffened. You presume too much. Always, Wolfe said. It is how one reaches the truth. He turned his head slightly toward Kimmel. Doctor, when Henri vanished, did you search your storage facilities? Kimmel blinked. No, I assumed he'd gone willingly. Why? Because Miss Rousseau required proof of her success, Wolfe said. She would not trust the destruction of the sample to chance. She would need to verify the effect. Henri was useful until then. Afterward, an inconvenience. Kramer's eyes narrowed. You saying the kid's dead? I'm saying, Wolfe replied, that Miss Rousseau visited the greenhouse the following day. Mr. Goodwin observed her attire, impeccable, unsuited for soil or sweat. Yet the heel of her left shoe carried a faint streak of clay unique to that region's soil. I noticed it when she entered this room last night. Henry's body will be found beneath the older test beds, the ones Kimmel abandoned for lack of yield. Kramer cursed softly and gestured to his men, who'd been waiting in the hall. Get a team upstate. Now. He turned back to Wolfe. If you're wrong, I'll mount that chair of yours and saw it in half. Wolfe's mouth twitched. Do so, and you will owe me another. The one you destroy is irreplaceable. Rousseau sat motionless. For the first time there was no veneer, no irony. You think you've outwitted me, she said. But without proof. Proof, Wolfe interrupted, is the luxury of the unimaginative. The acetone residue on Henri's gloves will match the samples recovered from your agency's storeroom. You ordered the compound for a client months ago. Cosmetic testing, was it not? Convenient inventory. The evidence is already in motion. Kramer gave her the look of a man fitting handcuffs in his imagination. You're done talking, lady. He signaled his men, and they escorted her out. Kimmel slumped in his chair, rubbing his eyes, while Said tried to slink toward the door until I blocked him. You stay put, I said. Kramer might want to hear you explain your role in broadcasting the apocalypse. When the noise faded and the door closed, Wolfe let out a long breath, not relief exactly, more like an indulgence in silence. Fritz appeared with brandy as if on cue. Miss Vaughan was the first to speak. You were right, every step of the way. I didn't believe anyone could orchestrate so much deception so calmly. She was an artist of pretense, Wolfe said, sipping. But artistry without conscience is vandalism. Henri, she said quietly, you think he's truly dead? Yes, Wolfe said simply. She would not risk a living witness. Her genius demanded permanence. Vaughan's expression hardened. Then she'll face it. And after this, so will I. I owe you. You owe me my fee, Wolfe said, setting down the glass, and the assurance that no one will attempt to breed another onion that mocks tears. Nature intended them as reminders. Remove the sting, and you remove the honesty. She managed a weary smile. You make tragedy sound philosophical, Mr. Wolfe. Everything is, he said. Even flavor. After she left, I lingered by the window, watching Kramer's car pull away into the night. Wolfe reached for another onion from the crate. turned it slowly in his palm, and set it back down. "I've often thought," he murmured, "that deceit has the scent of rot long before it spoils." Fortunately, Miss Ruisseau lacked the patience to let hers ferment. "Good thing for justice," I said. "Pfui," he said, closing his eyes. "Justice, perhaps, but not digestion. Archie, the brandy." I poured him a glass, thinking, as always, that when Nero Wolfe finished a case, the world didn't change much, but it sat a little straighter, and if somewhere in upstate New York a bed of onions would soon yield one final truth, that was just the universe catching up to him. It was nearly midnight when the call came. I was half a glass deep into a bourbon that had earned its keep, and Wolfe was pretending not to doze in his chair when the phone rang with a tone that means Kramer, not courtesy. I picked it up. "Goodwin," I said. Kramer's voice came low, gravelly and grim. "We found him." I didn't have to ask who. "Where?" "Greenhouse pit, exactly where Wolfe said. Buried under a layer of compost and fertilizer sex. Poor kid didn't have a chance. Neck broken first, clean, before burial. We've got the forensics team pulling what's left." He paused, then added, "Tell your boss I don't know how the devil he keeps doing it, but I'm getting tired of having to admit he's right." "Wouldn't dream of spoiling your reputation, Inspector," I said. He grunted. "We've got Rousseau locked up. She's not talking yet. Her lawyer's screaming conspiracy. I'll keep you posted when she cracks." "Do that," I said and hung up. Wolfe opened one eye. "Confirmation?" "Yeah. Henry's dead, buried right where you said he'd be. Broken neck." He nodded slowly, not satisfied, but resolved. "Pfui. People are always so clumsy when imitating necessity. Death, Mr. Goodwin, should never be the byproduct of ambition. It should, if it must occur, serve a purpose." "Tell that to the late Miss Ruisseau," I said. "She thought she was conducting a masterclass in ambition. Turns out she was just writing her own epitaph." He didn't respond, only motioned toward the decanter. I poured 2 fingers for him, one for me. The silence that followed was the kind that doesn't need filling. The case wasn't done yet, but the worst of it had surfaced, literally. The next morning brought rain and headlines. The Gazette ran with "Publicist charged in agricultural sabotage homicide." Wolfe's name appeared nowhere, which is the way he likes it. He ate breakfast without comment, while Fritz tried, unsuccessfully, to hide the paper under a napkin. By 11, the doorbell announced another visitor. Saul Panzer again, dry as the rain wasn't. I let him in. He shook off his coat, took the chair nearest the wall, and handed Wolfe an envelope. "She's talking," Saul said. "Word from downtown. Ruisseau confessed to paying Henri, but she's pinning the death on Kimmel. Claims he caught them tampering and tried to stop it. Says he turned violent, that she panicked, shoved Henri, and Kimmel finished the job." Wolfe didn't blink. A convenient tale, confession laced with dilution. Typical. Saul nodded. "Kramer's not buying it. They'll question Kimmel again this afternoon. Thought you'd want to know before it hits the evening papers." "Thank you," Wolfe said. "Stay available." When Saul left, I whistled low. "She's playing her last card." "Yes," Wolfe said. "A bad one. Kimmel lacks the temperament for violence. His anger is intellectual, not physical. No, she acted alone, but she now seeks company in her guilt." "So what's the move?" I asked. "The move," he said, "is patience. Kramer will confirm what I already know. Meanwhile, Fritz will serve lunch, and you, Archie, will refrain from speculating aloud. It disturbs digestion." I did as ordered, but by late afternoon, Patience was wearing thin. The phone rang again at 4. Kramer's voice was heavier this time. "Wolfe," he said, "we've got Rousseau booked solid. Kimmel's cleared. He admitted helping her with the lab setup, but says he didn't know what she planned. Evidence backs him up. She went back to the greenhouse after he left, confronted Henri when he refused to keep quiet. He threatened to tell Vaughan. She lost it. knocked him down, hit his head on the bench edge. Panicked, buried him. She's done. Jury'll eat it alive. Wolfe made a sound that wasn't quite satisfaction. You are efficient, Inspector. Efficiency is a virtue I prize. Convey my gratitude to your men. Yeah, Kramer muttered. Next time you know where the body's buried, try calling me first. He hung up before Wolfe could respond. I replaced the receiver. Well, that's that. Not entirely, Wolfe said. Miss Vaughan will wish to hear it from me. Summon her. She arrived an hour later, trench coat damp, eyes shadowed. Wolfe relayed the essentials with clinical precision, omitting the gore, but not the truth. She listened, face still, hands clasped tightly. When he finished, she said softly, Henri was young, idealistic. He believed in the work. Belief is not armor, Wolfe said. It invites attack from those who envy conviction. Her eyes lifted to his. You make it sound inevitable. It often is, he said. But you will recover, Miss Vaughan. Your product is innocent, your name cleansed. Continue your enterprise, but temper ambition with vigilance. She exhaled, stood, and offered her hand. You've given me back more than a company, Mr. Wolfe. You've given it meaning again. He inclined his head. Nonsense. Meaning is self-imposed. I simply removed the noise. After she left, I lingered, watching rain slide down the window. Wolfe was silent, fingers pressed together like an architect inspecting invisible blueprints. Funny thing, I said finally, all that fuss over onions. He opened his eyes. There is no triviality in creation, Archie. Food, like justice, depends on balance. Remove the essence, and all that remains is deception. Miss Vaughan sought purity, and others sought profit. The collision was inevitable. Still, I said, a kid died for it. Yes, Wolfe murmured. And that, too, will be forgotten once the next miracle seed is announced. The world consumes novelty faster than truth. Fritz entered with a tray. Roast duck, fragrant and perfect. Wolfe regarded it approvingly. At least here, he said, the balance endures. Join me. As we ate, the office settled back into its natural rhythm. Outside, the rain softened to mist, and the world, for once, kept its distance. When the plates were cleared and Wolfe's chair began its familiar creak, I said, You know, if you ever decided to market an onion that actually does make people cry, you'd make a fortune. He gave me a sidelong look. I prefer a fortune earned through serenity, not hysteria. And if tears are required, the world provides them in abundance. I nodded. You're probably right. Not probably, he said, closing his eyes. Certainly. That was Wolfe's version of a benediction. And as the night closed in and the city hummed beyond the brownstone walls, I realized the case had ended the way most do. Around here, not with triumph, not with tragedy, but with a quiet truth served best with dinner and a glass of brandy. Evening settled over the brownstone like a sigh. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets outside slick and shining, the lamps reflecting on wet pavement like scattered coins. Wolfe had finished dinner, pheasant because Fritz had declared it a day worth honoring, and was now settled into his chair, eyes half closed, the faint curl of satisfaction hovering around his mouth. For most men, a solved case meant a paycheck. For Wolfe, it was digestion unimpeded by ignorance. I was by the window, checking the headlines again. Rousseau's arrest had moved from scandal to spectacle. Reporters were calling it the case of the poisoned harvest. Wolfe would hate that. It sounded theatrical, and he preferred accuracy to flair. Kramer's making you famous again, I said. Front page. He's quoted as saying you anticipated the course of events with unreasonable precision. That's police speak for Wolfe's a smug genius. Pfui, Wolfe said without opening his eyes. If they wish to print truth, let them learn syntax first. There was a faint knock on the door. Fritz, polite as a sunrise. Excuse me, Mr. Wolfe. Miss Vaughan is here. She asked if you would receive her. She will insist, so I shall yield, Wolfe said. Show her in, Fritz. Leda Vaughan entered wearing a dark coat and a look of quiet resolve. There was no tremor now, no panic, just exhaustion that came from survival. She carried a small wrapped parcel which she placed carefully on Wolfe's desk. I came to thank you, she said softly, and to return this. Wolfe's brow creased. A gift, Miss Vaughan? A sample, she said, unwrapping the parcel. Inside lay a single onion, small, golden-skinned, perfectly shaped. The final certified Lacrima 9 from the greenhouse Henri worked in, the only one untouched by sabotage. The board wanted to destroy the whole line. Too much stigma, but I kept one. He studied it as though it might reveal a confession. Sentimentality is a disease, Miss Vaughan. Keep it if you must, but do not expect it to cure grief. I didn't bring it for comfort, she said. I brought it because I've decided to dissolve the Lacrima project entirely. No more breeding for convenience. We'll return to traditional cultivars, real onions, the kind that sting. Henri believed they were honest. I think he was right. Wolfe's mouth curved faintly. Then perhaps you have learned something from adversity that universities cannot teach. You will make enemies among your investors. I already have, she said, but at least this time I'll be honest about what I'm selling. I watched her as she spoke, her voice steady, her gaze direct. She wasn't the same woman who had arrived that first night, clutching panic like a handbag. There was steel now and sadness, where vanity had been. You've done well, Wolfe said. Continue to do so quietly. Noise invites fools. She smiled faintly. Then I'll take your advice. Thank you again, Mr. Wolfe. And you, Mr. Goodwin. I walked her to the door. When she was gone, I came back to find Wolfe staring at the onion, still on the blotter. The thing looked ordinary enough, but with Wolfe's expression fixed on it, it might as well have been a sacred relic. You planning to frame it? I asked. He grunted. It represents irony, not art. Then irony's getting better table space than most of your cases. He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned back, eyes on the ceiling. Archie, do you know why I despise convenience? Because it requires other people to move? Because it corrodes virtue, he said. People grow lazy, then dishonest, then cruel. That woman, Ruisseau, she wanted to replace substance with spectacle. The same impulse that breeds tasteless onions breeds tasteless ambition. It is the modern plague. Not everyone's infected, I said. Vaughan learned. He nodded slightly. Pain is the best instructor. It demands attendance. We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the city murmured, a cab horn, a stray shout, the low hum of life carrying on in ignorance of morality or onions. I've learned not to interrupt Wolfe when he's ruminating. It's like poking at a volcano to see if it's cooled. Finally, he spoke again. We will dine early tomorrow. Fritz will prepare veal kidneys with shallots. Traditional recipe, I asked. Unmodified, he said. I prefer my food, like my truths, unengineered. That was his way of closing a chapter. Wolfe never says a case is over. He merely reclaims his peace. I gathered the papers from the desk, stacked them neatly, and extinguished the last lamp. The crate in the corner, the one that had started all this, was gone. Fritz must have moved it earlier, as if purging the room of its last deceit. As I turned to leave, I saw the single onion still sitting there, catching a sliver of lamplight. I thought of Henri, of Vaughan, of Ruisseau and her pride, and of Wolfe, unshaken as always. The brownstone was quiet again. The world outside could spin, stumble, and sob. But here, logic had the last word. Good night, boss, I said. Good night, Archie, he murmured. Then, almost to himself, and good riddance to the onion that made no one cry. That was Nero Wolfe. Victory without gloating, wisdom without comfort. And me? I turned off the light, shut the door, and left him alone with his thoughts, knowing full well that somewhere in the dark he was still peeling the truth, layer by layer. It was 2 nights later when the brownstone's quiet rhythm took another unexpected detour. I was at my desk going through some bills that wouldn't pay themselves. Wolfe's version of financial asceticism meant he noticed every cent that left but forgot most of the ones that came in when the doorbell rang at an hour too late for courtesy. I opened it expecting Kramer or some overeager reporter. Instead, Saul Panzer stood there, hat dripping rain, his face set in that blank look he uses when something is both serious and unpleasant. "Evening, Saul," I said. "You look like you've been following a ghost through the sewers." "Close enough," he said, stepping inside. "There's something you should hear before the morning papers get it wrong." Wolfe was still in the office, reading The Physiology of Taste with the kind of absorption most men reserve for sin. I waved Saul in and shut the door behind him. Wolfe didn't look up, which meant he'd already decided Saul's presence was justified. "Miss Rousseau," Saul began, "was found dead in her cell an hour ago." I stopped mid-step. "Suicide? They're calling it that," Saul said. "But Kramer's not sure. She was under observation, no contraband, nothing she could have used. Still, she's gone." That got Wolfe's attention. He set the book down, his hand lingering on the cover as though reluctant to leave it. "Gone," he repeated softly. "How convenient." Saul nodded. "Kramer's furious. The warden swears procedure was followed. Official word will be self-inflicted trauma, head against the wall, but Kramer says she had no reason to. She just signed a statement promising to cooperate for leniency." I let out a low whistle. "You mean she was ready to sing and someone made sure the song never started?" "Exactly," Saul said. "Kramer's digging, but someone with influence shut it fast. Orders from above. They want it quiet." Wolfe's fingers began to drum on the arm of his chair. That was never good. It meant his brain was heating up like an engine under strain. "Archie, brandy, and then the file." I poured the brandy, handed it over, and pulled the case folder from the cabinet. Wolfe leafed through the pages, eyes darting, mind already arranging the facts like pieces on a chessboard. Suicide, indeed. Pfui. Miss Rousseau lacked the courage for such finality. Her vanity would not permit her to die unseen. No, this is the conclusion of another hand. Someone tidying loose ends. "Loose ends don't strangle themselves," I said. "You thinking one of the investors? Or maybe Kimmel?" He shook his head. "Kimmel is innocent by temperament and guiltless by lack of imagination. The investors, perhaps. But her death offers them no profit. She had already served her purpose as scapegoat. No, Archie. Someone else profits from silence. Someone for whom exposure, even by a disgraced woman, would prove ruinous." Saul cleared his throat. "Vaughan." Wolfe's eyes flicked to him, not her. Miss Vaughan's ambition now wears humility. She has no motive. But her board, her board remains unchanged, does it not? "Far as I know," Saul said. "Same chairman, same silent partners." "Precisely," Wolfe murmured. "Follow the money, Saul. Who stood to gain from the scandal, not in reputation, but in shares? Who bought into the company during its collapse?" "I can find out by morning," Saul said. "Do so, quietly." After Saul left, I turned to Wolfe. "You really think Rousseau was just a middle piece?" He gave me the kind of look reserved for rhetorical stupidity. "Every puppet requires a string, Archie. She danced well, but not alone. She was ambitious, not omniscient. Someone financed her scheme, encouraged her sabotage, perhaps even suggested the method. Her death ensures that someone remains invisible." I leaned against the desk. "So we're not done after all." "We are never done," he said dryly. only interrupted by meals. He spent the rest of the night dictating notes to me, cross-referencing contracts and communication logs from Vaughan's company. By 2 a.m., my eyes were burning, but Wolfe was still sharp as a hawk perched over carrion. Finally, he stopped, folded his hands, and said, "Tomorrow, we dine late. You will meet Saul at 10 and collect his findings. If my inference is correct, there will be a name." When I got to Saul the next morning, he was in a diner on 38th with a black coffee and a file thick enough to hold trouble. He slid it across the table. "2 major buy-ins during the fallout," he said. "One's a shell company registered in the Caymans. Guess who owns controlling interest? A Mr. Ansel Ruisseau, brother to the deceased." I blinked. She had a brother. "Apparently not in her press kit," Saul said. "Financial broker. Works quiet, old money, new tricks. He bought 40% of Vaughan Food stock right after the scandal broke. Price was dirt cheap. With her gone, he inherits the trust and the shares. Full circle." When I brought it back, Wolfe was waiting, eyes already half closed, as if he'd heard the result before I spoke. "The brother," he said simply. "Yeah," I said. He cleaned house. "Neat, efficient, no survivors." Wolfe exhaled through his nose. "Family, Archie, is the most reliable engine of betrayal. Blood may thicken affection, but it curdles morality." "So what do we do? Hand it to Kramer?" "In time," he said. "Kramer detests being manipulated, and this will offend his dignity. First, however, Miss Vaughan must be informed. She deserves to know whose shadow still looms over her enterprise." He leaned back, heavy and thoughtful. "Archie, arrange it. Here. Tomorrow evening." I nodded, though something about the look in his eyes told me it wasn't just another meeting. Wolfe wasn't satisfied with the case tied up neatly. He wanted the knot burned away. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to its little tragedies. But inside that brownstone, under the hum of the orchids and the steady clock tick, the game had started again. Wolfe had caught the scent of the next lair, and I knew better than to think the onion was done making us cry. Miss Vaughan arrived promptly the next evening, punctuality being her new habit since deceit had nearly ruined her company. Fritz led her into the office, where Wolfe was stationed in his chair like a high priest before the altar of logic. The only change in the room was the absence of the crate that had started it all. Fritz had burned it at Wolfe's insistence. "Wood retains guilt," he had said. Vaughan looked calmer now, though her eyes still carried that haunted vigilance of someone who's learned the cost of trust. She sat across from Wolfe, folding her gloves in her lap. "You said it was urgent," she began. "I assumed this meant it wasn't over." "It seldom is," Wolfe said. "Miss Vaughan, the public may consider the case closed. Ruisseau is dead, her confession sufficient for the authorities, and the world is content with a convenient ending. But contentment is no proof of truth. You deserve the latter." She straightened. "Then tell me." He gestured toward me. "Archie." I handed her the folder Saul had compiled, the purchase records, the shell company registration, the transfer of assets after Ruisseau's death. She read quickly, her lips tightening as she went. When she finished, she looked up slowly, face pale but composed. "Ansel," she said softly. "Her brother." "Yes," Wolfe said. "The architect in shadow. He financed the sabotage, urged his sister toward ruin, and then silenced her when she ceased to serve. With her death, he inherits her shares and leverage over your board. He is now the second largest stakeholder in Vaughan Foods. In essence, he owns the ashes of your misfortune." She stared at the papers a long moment. "And he'll keep them, won't he? The law won't touch him. He's untouchable. Too clean. Too distant." "Legally, yes," Wolfe said. "Morally, no, which is where we intervene." She blinked. "Intervene? How?" Wolfe settled back, eyes narrowing. By weaponizing truth, you will release a statement, not to the press, but to your shareholders, detailing Ruisseau's scheme, the murder, and the financial connection to her brother. You will not accuse him directly. You will merely express gratitude to the police for their thorough work and regret for the tragedy that followed. Imply nothing, yet reveal everything. In an hour, the markets will do what justice cannot. No financier will touch a man with that scent upon him. His fortune will rot faster than his sister's reputation. Vaughan's eyes widened as she realized what he meant. You're suggesting social annihilation. I am suggesting equilibrium, Wolfe said. The world, Miss Vaughan, cannot abide taint that smells of blood and money. Let him choke on reputation, the only poison he cannot dilute. She hesitated. And if it turns on me? It will not, he said. The narrative is on your side. You were the victim, wronged, vindicated, and now purified by tragedy. The public adores redemption almost as much as scandal. For a moment, she looked uncertain. Then her shoulders straightened. All right, I'll do it. Good, Wolfe said. Mr. Goodwin will assist you with the phrasing. Words are as potent as chemicals if mixed correctly. I spent the next morning in Vaughan's office, shaping sentences that sounded like sympathy but cut like scalpels. By noon, the statement was released. By dusk, Ansel Ruisseau's name was trending across every financial wire, whispered in circles where reputation was currency. Wolfe read the market reports that evening with his usual expression of detached satisfaction. His holdings are in freefall, I said, scanning the latest figures. He's lost nearly 2/3 of his investment value in 12 hours. You don't even have to poison a man when rumor can do it for you. Precisely, Wolfe said. Truth, properly presented, is the most elegant toxin. That night, the brownstone was quiet again, but there was an air of completion that felt different, deeper. Wolfe didn't gloat, didn't celebrate. He simply sat, hands steepled, eyes thoughtful. I poured 2 brandies and handed him one. You know, I said, if you'd ever taken up politics, you could have ruled the country without leaving your chair. Pfui, he said. Politics requires compromise. I prefer consequences. Same thing, depending on your perspective. Only to those without one, he said. There was a knock at the door. Fritz again, holding a small envelope. Delivered by hand, Mr. Wolfe. No return address. I took it and opened it. Inside was a single note, typed, You may have unmasked one, but the field is never empty. Every truth has roots you have yet to dig. It was unsigned. I handed it to Wolfe. He read it twice, expression unreadable, then placed it on the desk beside the burned edges of the Onion's wrapper. One relic of the case he hadn't allowed Fritz to throw away. Someone's feeling literary, I said. You think it's Ruisseau's associate? Perhaps, he murmured. Or perhaps merely an observer who mistakes insinuation for intellect. Either way, it changes nothing. He looked at the note again and then at me. Archie, file this with the case documents. There is no need to respond. The world is full of correspondents who mistake mystery for depth. I nodded, slipped the paper into the folder, and closed it. Outside, thunder rumbled far off, rolling through the city like a reminder that peace never stays long in New York. Another case brewing? I asked. Undoubtedly, Wolfe said. Human folly is inexhaustible. He leaned back, closing his eyes. But for tonight, let us have peace. Fritz will bring the cheese and the rain will mind its business. I smiled, knowing the ritual was complete. Another layer, peeled, another truth uncovered. And somewhere, justice, Wolfe's brand of it, had been served without fanfare. I dimmed the lights, letting the quiet return to its rightful place. The Onion sat on the desk under the lamplight, whole and glimmering, a reminder that even the mildest things can draw tears if handled the right way. And Wolfe, as always, had handled it perfectly. The next morning, the brownstone had that rare quality of complete stillness, the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own thoughts, and in Wolfe's case, the ones of everyone else too. I was moving through the office with a half-empty notebook when Wolfe finally spoke, eyes fixed on the single golden Lacrima 9 onion sitting on the desk like a crown. "Archie," he said, voice measured, "all paths have converged. Miss Vaughan has regained her company. The saboteur is dead, and the final layer of deception rests exposed, waiting for acknowledgement. It is time for clarity." I nodded. "You mean the brother?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "Ansel Ruisseau, the architect of ambition cloaked in kinship. He manipulated his sister, orchestrated the sabotage, and profited from her downfall. He underestimated human observation, the one faculty that cannot be purchased." I leaned against the desk, coffee in hand. So, the market collapse was justice enough. Wolfe's fingers twitched. Justice, as always, must be measured. One cannot kill with sentiment, nor punish with flair. The boy is gone, the sister silenced, the brother's fortune poisoned by notoriety. Markets will serve what law cannot. Miss Vaughan will reclaim her enterprise, not by power, but by rectitude. There was a knock at the door. It was Vaughan herself. She entered, calm now, composed, but carrying the faint tremor of someone who had glimpsed mortality and ambition simultaneously. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, voice steady, "I wanted to see you before the board meeting, and to understand fully what happened." He gestured to the chair. "Sit, Miss Vaughan. The events have been recorded in sequence. Henri Moreau's loyalty, Ruisseau's ambition, her brother's interference. Each acted according to self-interest, each a layer of the deception. You were the constant, your integrity tested, but not compromised." She nodded, absorbing each word. "And Ruisseau? Her death?" "Necessary," Wolfe said, tone calm but unyielding. She had fulfilled her function. All who act without principle must eventually confront consequences. Death in this instance was not poetic, only practical. Her absence ensures no further manipulation of your company. The truth remains uncontaminated, much like the onion you kept. I noticed the slight catch in her throat. "And Ansel? He can't be prosecuted fully, can he? Legally, he is distant enough to avoid complete censure. Morally, he is imprisoned by reputation. Social scrutiny will serve where law cannot. Reputation, once tainted, is seldom restored." "That is sufficient," Wolfe said. I exhaled, realizing that in Wolfe's eyes, morality and intellect always outweigh the brute application of law. Justice was measured, precise, and entirely cerebral. Miss Vaughan reached across the desk and touched the onion lightly. He believed these onions would make no one cry. Funny, isn't it? Wolfe's lips twitched. Irony, Miss Vaughan, is the spice the human palate often lacks. This onion, the one unspoiled, is now a reminder. Nature intended tears, but you have chosen to honor flavor and integrity instead. That choice defines you. She smiled faintly. I hope Henri would approve. He would, Wolfe said simply. I shifted in my chair, thinking of all the threads that had led to this quiet victory, the sabotaged tasting, the chemical residue, the hidden hands, and the ultimate exposure of ambition cloaked in familial loyalty. And Wolfe, as always, had unraveled the puzzle without ever leaving his chair, commanding events with intellect alone. For a moment, the brownstone felt eternal, its quiet sanctity restored. Wolfe returned the onion to its place beside the remnants of the burnt crate. Archie, he murmured, we eat. Life, like flavor, requires balance. Chaos is a spice best used sparingly. I poured the brandy, taking a slow sip. And no one cried, I said, nodding toward the onion. Not from tears, Wolfe said, but from comprehension. That is enough. And with that, The brownstone resumed its usual rhythm, quiet, ordered, and entirely under the control of Nero Wolfe. Where intellect triumphed, subtlety prevailed, and justice, precise and inevitable, reigned without fanfare. The case was closed, the layers peeled, and the onion that made no one cry had revealed everything that mattered, 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 everything that mattered.